And hello, and welcome to another episode of the A Full Quota podcast. My name is Mpho as I try to get the name of the show up on a thing, and I've got Tim Del Lace with me for this broadcast, as we normally do. Tim's my partner in crime in everything that happens with the Full Quota podcast. Tim, we've got something very special for our listeners and our viewers coming into the Cricket World Cup. It is Women's Cricket World Cup time, so we're going to get guests from different teams as the Momentum Proteas navigate the 7 fixtures they need to navigate to get themselves into the playoffs or the semi-finals, and then eventually, hopefully, give us that maiden World Cup crown that we're chasing. And so today we have a guest, Tim. I'm going to give you the honors. I just want to let people know before I hand over to you that they obviously subscribe. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and tweet us at One World SR. We will be covering most of the South African games, so please do be on the lookout for that. And also the Bangladesh series is happening in and around the World Cup time for the men, and so there's going to be lots of cricket happening in March and April, so please do watch out for that. Tim, what country are we focusing on today?
Today we are focusing on England, and we've got a commentator who will be with the Test match special team over in England. So you'll be able to listen in on the games that she does. So she's based in the Bath region of England, and we'll be talking all things England, which would be a little bit spicy considering what happened in the last World Cup.
We know. So let's bring Melissa Story on to let us know about the defending 50-over world champions, England. And so obviously South Africa did have a bit of a situation and win that group game against England that in the World Cup in Australia. That was a T20 one. But Melissa, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm surprised you brought up that semi-final, to be honest, because it was on my list of taboo subjects to not bring up.
No, we talk about all things there, all things.
Yes.
The good and the bad.
I mean, it would be like an English commentator not speaking about the Ashes, which we desperately want to do, but of course we have to, unfortunately.
Well, that's where I think we're going to be starting with the Ashes, so I do apologize for that. Obviously, the Ashes didn't go well for obviously the men's and the women's team, but the women's team as well. And I think for me, looking at that series, it kind of felt like it was preparation for the England women's team to get some reps, some games in that place around the world where it's the two colonies, New Zealand and Australia, similar pitches, similar conditions, to get used to it. Obviously, it wasn't great, but what was the value that you think the team gained out of that Ashes series coming into this World Cup that's happening in a few weeks' time?
I mean, first of all, I'd agree with you that the fact you've got an Ashes series, but it's feeling like preparation for a World Cup is really strange. And of course, they were meant to play the T20s at the end of the Ashes series. Those were moved forward to accommodate for the World Cup. So you've got this historic series between England and Australia, and as you say, it did feel like a practice for this World Cup, but I think it will give England maybe just a little bit of a warm-up to them. Obviously, it's not ideal with the results they suffered, particularly those 3 losses in the 50-over format at the end. That's not going to be great for England's morale. The positives, though, is that they were playing Australia, and Australia are undoubtedly favourites for this World Cup. It's almost a question of who's going to come in second place, who's going to make that other final spot, which is a negative way to think about it, really. But England, Australia, likewise, South Africa with their series with the West Indies, that's going to be invaluable for them. But I mean, the current series of you've also got New Zealand's women and Indian women are playing out there at the moment, 5 ODIs. I think they've
and India won as some couple of days,
Yeah, so I think it is interesting, but hopefully England could take just a bit of practice. As you say, the similarity between the Australian and the New Zealand pitches will be beneficial for them, hopefully.
Yes, you said you hope that I was able to watch a fair amount of it, and it seemed to me that although England did reasonably well with the ball, if we're focusing on the ODIs, it was the batting that struggled. They got themselves into a really bad situation, and then on the odd occasion when they got themselves into an okay position, they weren't able to go into the next gears, if you like. So they got themselves into a quagmire, and they just weren't able to get out. Do you have any idea as to why that was? Okay, Australia's quality side, but England are, the next best. Are they not?
I'd say there's a few kind of on this same platform under Australia now, and usually you almost had Australia up here, England below, and then the likes of New Zealand, South Africa, India. But I really think it's leveled out a lot over these last few years, and England's kind of got to watch their back. But I agree entirely. And I mean, the first example of that, which glared out, was the first T20, the only T20 they played. England had a fantastic first innings score with Tammy Beaumont, Danny Wyatt making runs, and their bowlers completely lost it. And in fact, not only their bowlers, but England's fielding was, I would say, across the Ashes series, quite poor. They really pride themselves on their fielding a lot of the time. And it's a massive thing, having been part of these domestic training in the UK before. Fielding is the number one priority. Women want to be performing at the same level as male professionals on a fielding level, because that is where it could be completely even. So, and again, I agree with you in the ODIs, especially I think the third ODI, England got Australia out for a low score, around 200 runs. And anyone listening at home, we were staying up all night going, finally, this is a win for England. We can chase this down. But yeah, I would agree. The batting it's really interesting. There's a few questions, I would say, going into this World Cup for England. Obviously, Heather Knight is in fantastic form, and I know we'll be coming back to her later, but she is almost the Joe Root of that England women's side, just the anchor who everyone else almost has to bat around. But the bowling department for England is so strong. You've got Brunt and Siver as an option, Shrubsole coming in. Kate Cross has excelled these last few years, and it's great to see that. And then the likes of spin with Eccleston, who's world class, and Charlie Dean, who I'm friends with, so I'll scream about her for the rest of my time on this podcast. But yeah, the batting has been disappointing. And when you look at the names in that team and you're going, hang on, we've got Beaumont, we've got Wyatt, we've got Siver and Dunkley coming up through the ranks. Why are we not performing? And I think in these they've got the 2 warm-up games, I think England do. So they're really going to have to figure out something there. And I think the biggest problem is their opening slot. Tammy Beaumont is completely solidified in that opening spot, but who's she going to be accompanied with? You've got Winfield Hill, who personally I think may just be going beyond her prime. She was good when she started out for England, but just recently, every time she's gone to the crease, she's looked like she's struggled. She's given a few too many chances and is getting, about a 25 runs, but off something like 50, 60 balls. In modern one-day cricket, that is not a high enough strike rate. Then as an alternative option, you've got Danny Wyatt, the opener in the T20s, who can go in there, get you a feisty 30 off maybe 25 balls. But there is the risk with her, a bit in a Jason Roy sense, that she may get a duck or she may get a 50. There is no in between very often with Danny Wyatt. And then finally, the new contender, you've got Emma Lamb, who opened, or Emma Lamb, who got pushed into the final ODI in the Ashes. First ball against Elise Perry, going, don't worry, just face one of the best bowlers of the women's history ever, and unfortunately got that, I think, 2-ball duck in the end. But yeah, England's got to work out that opening order, because as you see so often in women's cricket, those 2 openers, they set the tone for the innings going ahead.
This is an interesting one, because I'm listening to you and it feels like, if it was like somebody just normally just listening to the podcast, they'd feel like England are a team trying to break through and they're trying to fight their way through. Like in this World Cup, they're going to find some struggles. But when you look at the landscape of women's cricket around the world, it's England and Australia. South Africa and all the other teams are fighting for the other 2 spots, in the semifinals, and then they'll figure out how to navigate that. I know the benchmark, obviously playing Australia kind of gave England the benchmark as to where they are. But from with everybody else in mind, where do you think this, every other team in mind, where do you think this England team sits? Are there any countries you're worried about? Do you think that the game has gotten a lot closer in terms of quality compared to what had happened 4 years ago in the Caribbean? Where does this team sit? Not in the context of Australia, but in the context of everybody else. Because I understand the frustrations with Australia, and I think in this World Cup, they are the perennial favorites. But there are other teams in and around you in that tier below that could break through. But is this squad set up for that?
I think if England go out there and they perform the best they can, then in my personal opinion, they are still the second to Australia. However, from recent series, if they don't quite get things right, and as Tim said, if they when the ball's in their court and they just let it leave and release that pressure, then my three teams who pose the biggest challenge is you've got New Zealand, you've got a seriously experienced squad, which is similar to England with some really good youthful players coming up like Amelia Kerr, and their bowling attack really bring quite a lot of excitement into this game, as we saw in that series recently between New Zealand and India. They can just pull something out of the bag. If Susie Bates at the top of the order or Sophie Devine gets going, and if England suddenly release that pressure, they could apply quite a bit to them. Again, and this isn't just sucking up, but South Africa, apart from Dano van Niekerk, they are playing the same team they played in the last World Cup. They are the most experienced team in this World Cup going into it. It's incredible, to be honest. And again, they've got the likes of Woodward at the top of the order. You've got Lizelle Lee. If they can strike and set a good platform, put the pressure on Brunt and Civet in those power play overs, suddenly the game can be taken away. And they've got such an exciting bowling attack as well, with Cap and Ishmael and these younger seamers coming through, that they could pose a threat to England if they don't really go in there hard. And then finally, India, who they frustrate me, because I think a lot of parallels can be drawn with the India women's team and the India men's team of just this type of one-day cricket they play. It feels old-fashioned. And I don't know whether this is something to do with their cricketing board, but India will either go into a game and perform just adequately, or out of nowhere they will bring a performance which just sweeps the opposition away. So I don't think you can ever rule them out. You've just got to hope you catch them on a day where they're feeling a bit old-fashioned. And I mean, by leaving Jemima Rodriguez outside their squad, maybe the teams are going, phew, we don't have to bowl at her. But yeah, I think those four, any of those teams in England, New Zealand, South Africa, and India, it could be a completely open field entirely. And I think those are going to be the most exciting games of the tournament to keep an eye on for anyone watching and or tuning in overnight. Then focus on those tight games, because there's going to be some exciting clashes, I think.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
I think you got right on there. I think it's a lot more even now than it has been in recent years. So if there are certainly, instead of there being 2, maybe 3 teams, it's actually maybe 5 teams on their day that could really cause a lot of upsets in this World Cup, which is great to see. What about the England squad? In terms of the actual squad that was named, were there any surprises? Was there anyone there that you thought, well, I'm a bit surprised that she's there, and vice versa, a bit surprised that somebody's missing out? Were there any omissions?
I think the team they announced was quite expected in the end. The only kind of anomaly being Sarah Glenn obviously opting not to travel as a reserve because of mental health, not wanting to be in that bubble, of course, which we've heard from so many players is so difficult. So, of course, most people will be so sympathetic with that. But looking at their team, they've announced the 2 younger players who maybe, I think you've got Emma Lamb is the one I named earlier as a batter. You've got Charlie Dean, the young off spinner, and you've got Davis as a backup as well, who's another exciting young player. But I think if you're looking at that playing 11, you've got some very established players in there with Beaumont, Knight, Siver, Dunkley, Wyatt, Eccleston, Shrubsole. You've suddenly got 8 players in there who aren't going to be leaving that squad. And I think, as I've said before, I think there's a good mix there of experience and some players who will be playing their last 50 over World Cup and younger players who absolutely, this is going to be the most exciting moment of their careers so far. So if England can strike that balance correctly, I think the first 10 overs of their bowling innings, if they do play Brunt and Shrubsole, are going to be massive because that has the ability to completely decimate the opposition team. Or if the opposition comes at them hard, then it could throw England all over the place. But for me, the key players are the captain in Knight. If she has a good innings, then everyone else around her almost draws confidence from her and injects it into their own innings. So that's essential. And then the bowling for me, although you've got the excitement of Brunt and Shrubsole with the new ball, England's best tactic I've seen so far is Eccleston and Cross in the middle overs. And that's one thing England does get really right with their bowling is everyone knows their roles, absolutely. And Cross and Eccleston come in those middle overs. Cross's role is to be economical. She's not too concerned about wickets. She will bowl it full. She will make the batters play the ball and allow Eccleston just to build up that pressure at the other end and luckily get a few more of the wickets, which I know Kate Cross almost always comments on. But Eccleston, as one of the best women's spinners in the world right now, yeah, her middle overs could be quite interesting in this competition. So I'd say a strong team. I'm not expecting many surprises in selection, unless, of course, the coaching staff, because of COVID reasons, have to come on the pitch. Because I have seen that the poor England cricket's doctor and physio have been involved in fielding drills for the last 3 days. And if I was their team doctor, I would not be happy about that.
I'd be excited, by the way. I would love to do that. We had a situation like that in South Africa, I think it was 5 years ago, where one of the players was injured, and largely because of the transformation rules in domestic cricket, they had to find a black coach to kind of fill in. And so you had this 40-year-old, I think Jeffrey Toyota was that old. He came down into the Lions kit once more and was fielding at fine leg for until they asked some college kid to come over the fence and get in and be a fielder. So I've seen that happen before. It'll be very wild to see at the World Cup because I think I was at the World Cup qualifiers and we had a lot of COVID issues with the Sri Lanka team, and it got to a point where every 2 days there were 2 additional cases, and they had like a 16-player squad. And they were down to 10, I think, in their final game against the West Indies. They didn't play that game, but it would have been interesting to see how they were going to fill that 11th spot. But obviously now you're allowed to use medical personnel. So the ICC is now, trying to grow the game in other ways. That's the way I see it. What's this team's weakness? What is England's weakness? Is it? I know for instance, I look at South Africa and I know that when South Africa comes up against Bangladesh, India in this World Cup, they're going to struggle with spin, and Pakistan as well. They're going to struggle playing spin, and that's like South Africa's biggest weakness. But what is the England team's weakness? Where if you look at the side, you're like, ooh, if they come up against this, or if you put them in this situation, then they're not going to thrive.
That's interesting, quickly on your point, because a lot of pundits have been looking at South Africa's fixture list and going, their first 2 games are against Pakistan and Bangladesh. And most of the other teams in the tournament, we're going, oh, fantastic. We've probably got 2 of the weakest teams to play first. They're rubbing their hands going, what perfect practice. And then we'll have the more difficult teams. So it's interesting you say that actually for South Africa, that will pose the bigger challenge. And I mean, the playing of Spain is so important in the women's game.
I just to add on to that, it's not saying that. So for me, it is a problem for them, and I think for me, Pakistan's taken a step back in their cricket. Bangladesh don't play a lot of ODI cricket, and having watched both teams in Zim, South Africa should win. The only issue I have is if, let's say, and it's a pity that Thailand aren't in this World Cup, because Thailand is the one team that could give you 50 overs of spin bowling. And you just have to navigate that all the way through, even though obviously the pitches may not work. But it is something, and it's an Achilles heel that, and Tim knows this with our men's team and even our women's team. Even in this series against the West Indies, the moment the spinners came on, all hell broke loose. So it's one of those situations where you need like Lizelle and Laura at the top to kind of give you so much of an advantage that when the spinners do come in, even against India, Poonam Yadav and all those could then you just obviously can navigate. But it is quite interesting because you think it's an easy fixture. I'm looking at that with like eyes wide open, guys. Please don't do anything stupid.
I mean, it's interesting as well. Speaking of my experiences in the whole women's domestic setup, is the players who are getting selected for these franchise teams in the UK and then for England are the ones who are playing spin, because, you know, for anyone imagining in the women's game, it is nice to have pace on the ball, like so much nicer, because there's less effort to put into it. And traditionally, women being less strong than men, it's exactly what you want, a bit more pace on the ball. For example, I play men's cricket and it's fantastic. They're always like, should I slow down for you? And I'm like, no, quicken it up. I need to actually just lean on the ball. But when the spinners come on, especially those slow spinners, such as what India has, it is difficult to try and get that momentum to force it through the field and especially go over the top. And that's when those players stand apart, like Lizelle Lee, Woodward, Danny Wyatt, because they can bring the attack to the bowlers. But yeah, that's an interesting point. And kind of links into what I would say England's biggest weakness is in one-day cricket, and which was highlighted in that Ashes series with Australia, is run chases. And actually, this isn't just an English problem. I think it's a problem across women's cricket from the highest level to the lowest level, is that there are poor chasing records. It's an interesting comparison to make with the men's game, where a lot more teams now in white ball cricket, they want to chase, they want to know how many runs they need to get per over and just have that target in their mind. But in the women's games, few are very good at chasing. And I've got some stats here that, for example, Australia, their second innings average is 200. England's is 177, South Africa's 164, New Zealand 190. So even the best team in the women's game is averaging 200 in a run chase. So in that Ashes series, I was saying how Australia got bowled out for 200. Any good women's side should be going 200 in 50 overs. We can chase that down. That's a par score, but it's really not. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see, I think, on these New Zealand pitches, just hopefully they manage to strike a good balance between bat and ball and producing them. I think a good thing for the women's game is quick pitches, as a lot of people say. It's good to see that pace in the ball. It's good to see those edges carrying through to the slips. But England's got to improve at chasing. And I, for example, captain my club game. I love nothing more than chasing, but no one else in my team does. And obviously I have to adjust to what they want to do. But I think a lot more women's teams and England need to not panic as much when they're confronted with that run chase. And it was even highlighted in the Ashes Test match, where I think England had about 4 wickets in hand. They only needed 40 runs to win. Meg Lanning was doing some awful captaining, in my opinion, of saying you've got these tail enders in. She had about 5 fielders on the boundary. And if England had just kept their head on and been calm about this, they had the ability to knock around those 40 runs around the field. So Meg Lanning wasn't doing anything to stop that, but they didn't. And they played some appalling shots. And actually, although England managed to scrape that draw in the end, they should have won it. And a lot of players from that team have remarked and saying it feels like a loss because we should have won it. So England, I mean, if I was a team playing against England, I would be putting them into bowl first, 100%. I want to see how they can deal with the pressure of the run chase, especially if Heather Knight, if you take her wicket early, it could be a bit of a wobble for England's middle order, because you've got Sophia Dunkley, who's a very good player, inexperienced. And then you've got Amy Jones, who actually, although her keeping has been very good recently, her batting has not been. And she's not been in very good form at all. So get down to those two and the pressure's on.
Well, based on your analysis, it looks like even in New Zealand, win the toss, bat first, all the time.
Yeah. Like, it is so interesting. I mean, just even throwing sometimes the pitch analysis out the window, and you see it happen a lot more in women's domestic games as well. When I commentate on them, whoever is doing the run chase, it may be just a run chase of 150, and the amount of times you see teams slump to 7 down or something just before they get over the line, because they're playing in their own head and overcomplicated it. And you see these disappointing shots, which is one I remark on a lot, of players trying to clear the boundary at long on when there is a fielder at long on. not many players can hit those kind of shots. And I've been doing some research actually just yesterday on it about, I'm a massive advocate in the women's game for having bigger boundaries. If you have smaller boundaries, it becomes very much a 4 or single game. And that's not what you want in the women's game. It's a different skill set entirely. It's all about allowing them to get those 2s and get those 3s. And that is the way the women's game is going to improve. But with smaller boundaries, it's not possible. And people come up with this counter argument of saying, no, but they need to be smaller boundaries. We need to allow the women to hit 6s. The players who can hit 6s will still hit 6s on those boundaries. There's incredible statistics that I think it's in the women's T20 domestic competition, 50% of the 6s are hit, I think, by 10 players, and the other 50% is hit by 4 players. They are clearing the ropes on whatever ground they are playing in. So I don't know, we've got to have these bigger boundaries, and the women have just got to, I think, adjust tactically and say, where on this field right now, if we're chasing a score of 150, we don't need to play these big hoiks and be caught at long on. We need to work out where we can get a 2, where we can get a 3, and where we can really make the fielders work and put them under pressure. And I'm going to be very invested, I think, in this tournament, because I think the team who does that best is the team that's going to excel to the final.
Yes, and it's essentially looking for runs in and around the square. The types of field sets we've seen is always that ring field set where you've only got 2 fielders out, even outside of the power play, and then you just have a bowl shape with like 6 players in and around covering that, and it doesn't work for me. And everyone's standing on the ring, and there's so many 1s and 2s that you can have just in and around the square, and the ability to just play it across the line, just, come in, just dot it down, see what you can do. And the singles and 2s have always been a problem. Well, from a South African perspective, that I have with our team is that there isn't that strike rotation. If you look at the likes of Wolfhard, Lazaldi, Dene, boundary merchants, Marizan, boundary merchants. But that's where the issue lies. Yes, Tim?
I was just going to say, that happened in the West Indian series. We might have won the series, but they were huge overs, several overs where we either had top balls or we had balls going to the boundary. There was nothing in between, which was incredibly frustrating.
The 100 final with the Oval Invincibles versus Southern Brave. And at one point, Danon van Niekerk and Marizan Kapp were batting together in the middle. And they were, the singles weren't being run at all. And thank goodness Southern Vipers was something like 17 for 8, because otherwise their score by the end wouldn't have been enough. But the Southern Brave. But it's definitely a problem. And Australia, that's what they do so well, because even Meg Lanning, for example, who some people now are going, she's playing maybe an older version of ODI, a bit like Mitali Raj, a bit of the generation before, but she still makes it work in this more modern context because of how well she rotates the strike. And it allows those players like Talia McGrath, who I'm her new biggest fan because she was incredible in the series, and I didn't even mind when we lost when she was batting so well. But she strikes the balance perfectly because she has that timing and strength to hit the spinners down the ground and hit the seamers over cover. But if she's getting a good ball, she finds a way to turn that into a single anywhere, because there always will be, especially in those middle overs. You can guarantee the other team is going to have their 4 allotted fielders out. There should be a single there most balls. And that's how you get up to those scores of 250, 270. And is the opposition side going to chase that down based on these statistics? They're going to have to work really hard to get to that score. So, it's a completely different tactical game to men's cricket. And I think that's why it's so interesting to kind of compare them sometimes, because it's so much weight and so much depends on those 2s and 3s.
Yeah, so I've got one more question on my end, and it's related to that match on the 14th of March, game number 3 for both teams. South Africa will be playing England on that day. And the question to you is, in that South African team that's in New Zealand, who are you most afraid of? Who is the player that you think can take the game away from England? We saw that T20, and I think T20 brings teams closer together who aren't of of a sim or who have a golfing quality, and it just brings everything together, makes it a little bit easier. But obviously, it's a longer format of the game. There's a lot more time. Who do you think in South Africa, in the South African team, and it can be a couple of players, can take the game away from England?
For me, I've always liked her, and I agree wholeheartedly with this thing that she's got one of the best cover drives in cricket is Wyatt. And actually looking at the statistics compared of her and Heather Knight. Heather Knight's got 2,290 runs. She's got an average of about 41. Wyatt averages 44 with just as many runs, but kind of just always sneaks under the radar a bit. And I'd agree that her strike rate, maybe for the likes of T20 cricket, isn't quite there yet. But for ODI cricket, I do think if she can just stay in and cement herself at the crease, it's exciting. In terms of just someone for me to watch, Lizelle Lee is always exciting to watch, I must say. She's very Chris Gailey in her way. And I'm either going to see her smoke the England bowlers for 5 sixes and get out, or just get out first ball. So she doesn't waste any time. Absolutely love that. The likes of, a player who I went to go see this summer, actually, just because I wanted to see her play, of course, was Ishmael. She is like the most brilliant, scary bowler who I would never want to face her in my life, but I think she's so exciting to watch. And when she's fired up at the crease, a lot of resemblances to Catherine Brunt, but you can almost feel the batters quaking in their boots. But the ability and a lot of what I kind of admire of her is just she's so small almost in stature, and yet the pace she generates is, if anyone wants an example of what a bowling action should be and how as a women's bowler you can manage to get up to those 70 miles per hour, just watch her and watch how she builds that momentum up to the crease. And then I'd say my final player, because I've been looking obviously across the South Africa West Indies series, and South Africa seem to have quite a cemented team apart from they're not sure with their number 3 batter. They've been experimenting with 3 different batters, and then finally it's their final bowling option. They've had 4 different bowlers trying to kind of fill in that bowling option, but for me, it's Sekhukhune.
To me,
I really like her, and I like her bowling. I want her to be selected for these first few World Cup games, so hopefully I can get to see a bit more of her, because obviously with the timings it's been quite difficult to watch the series. But yeah, I'm excited to hopefully see her maybe cement her spot. She's a young and exciting bowler, and she can get a few years in this team successfully with Cap, with Ishmael, that fast bowling almost trio together would be exceptional. And I think any batting lineup is going to be looking at that bowling attack and going, oh my goodness, please bring the spinners on.
Yeah, so to me is my favorite. I think I just want her to get more game time and cement that place. And I think for the momentum purchase, it's that fourth seamer role, because obviously Cup's there, you've got Ayabonga Kaka, you've also got Shabnam Ishmael, and so trying to figure out who that fourth bowler is.
It's not having Diana Cook. That's an issue. She would be the one if she was fit. Not having her there is going to have an effect. Hopefully not too much of an effect, but it is going to have an effect.
But I think Tasman Brits will be batting at 3, because in that series Lizelle Lee was unavailable. So Tasman normally opens. Well, the last time we saw Tasman play for South Africa, she opened with Lizelle and Laura batted lower down the order. So I'm not sure if we're going to try and do that, or if you want to lead with Laura and Lizelle, have Tasman, Marizan, Chloe Tryon in that middle order, which I think is pretty good. And I think from a balance perspective, Marizan gives our team a little bit more structure. You can have another. I think Coach Hilton's trying to figure out is whether they need to have a frontline spinner, because that's what they were trying to do, trying out Chloe Tryon, trying out Sune Lees, who's the captain. But you've got a bowler in Nkululeko Mlaba, who's very good at what she does. I think England knows her well, because she did well in that game. It was actually her first game at the World Cup in Australia. So I think there's a lot of. We spoke with Hilton, I think, 4 months ago. He seemed settled, and I think the 11 was settled. But because of the injuries to Danae and Lizelle not being available for this final series, you kind of now have to figure out a way to rejig. So, for instance, South Africa's trying to figure out if Chloe and Sune can give you those 10 overs of spin. And if they can, that opens up a corner for either Masabata Klaus or Dumisi Kukune to come in. Or even, but Nadine's is a traveling reserve for this World Cup. And so he is, if this was in September after the West Indies tour, we wouldn't have any issues. But because Dene is out, it creates so many issues in terms of how the balance of the side is laid out. And so that's because Tasman doesn't give you a bowling option. She's just a pure batter and one of the most incredible fielders I've ever seen. So you find that, and it's going to be quite interesting to see how the warm-ups go, because obviously Lazelle will be available. She actually just her partner just gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and so she's I think she's in the MIQ right now, getting ready to join with the squad. So really excited to see how that's going to shape up, because it's presented a lot of headaches for Coach Hilton. But as you said, it's the most experienced squad in the world, because this team's been together for 10 years. The bulk of this team has been together for 10 years. And for even over that, because I think Dane and Marizan have been there even before 2010. So it's one of those situations where this is our time.
That's what I was going to ask. Just is this the best South African team you've ever seen?
Tim, you can answer that one.
I would say so. And it's why we're both a little bit nervous about this World Cup. we should do well, but how well is going to be the problem.
Yes.
But I would say, in all my years of watching women's cricket, South African women's cricket, this is the best. Because even with Diana out, it is the most balanced. We've got Arsenal in every areas of the team. In all departments, there are no, in my opinion, there are no glaring weaknesses that are popping out, which were the case in recent years. We didn't have enough bowling, in my opinion, but we certainly do have plenty of bowling at the moment. Just one more question, and we have to ask it: who's going to win the World Cup?
And also, just to add on to that, what's the expectation in England for this team?
I think, first of all, England's expectation, they will be going in the same, we want to win. They've spoken, they've put the Ashes behind them. They've gone, that's the best practice we could get. But it's so different in a World Cup. It's easy to come out of a series against just one team. They completely destroy you and you just feel awful. But as we've seen before with India knocking out Australia in World Cups, it can happen. All it needs is Australia to have one bad day and they could suddenly be out of this competition. And then it is a completely open bag. So I unfortunately do think that it would take a lot to stop Australia at the moment. And it pains me to say this, but they are looking like a strong squad and potential winners in this. But as I've said, I think England's eyeing up that spot. South Africa's eyeing up that spot. New Zealand is. India is. It's completely open potentially. And it's so positive to see looking into a women's sport and in women's cricket and going, not just it's just going to be an England-Australia final. It's not. It is not. And that is brilliant to see that across the world the standards are just improving so much that now we can look ahead into this tournament and not have a clue who's going to be those final two teams at the end. And that's just so exciting.
It is exciting. My only thing for South Africa is avoid position number 4. You do not want to finish 4th. You don't want to face Australia in the semi-final. I've had nightmares since that day at Sydney where all of a sudden it rained and rained and rained and rained. And then we had to play for 6 overs and they put us away. So, so that's the only pitfall for me. Avoid position 4. I can take a semi-final against England because I know anything can happen. I can take a semi-final against any other team but Australia. But even if it does happen, I think from a South African perspective, the squad's is at its best. As Tim says, I think I've never seen this team look this good.
I mean, their rankings, they're number 2 in the world at this format. They can wear that on their chest with pride and actually go, hang on, don't write us off anymore. And I mean, I I'm so excited when their tour to England this summer got announced, because it's going to be a good series. And the test match, that's down in my ends of England. So I'm going to try and get to as many days of that as possible. And just South Africa and this team they've got here at the moment, and maybe for the next 2-3 years, could be absolutely unbreakable. And it's just about how, after this tournament as well and going on, they prepare to bring these younger players in, as well as managing the slightly older players, to create this fusion of just experience and youth. And really, they should definitely have, as you said, they should have their eyes on the title, because it should not be written up. Although we're all going, oh, Australia this, Australia that, I would love for someone to knock Australia out.
Well, look, if you're playing Australia, make sure you win the toss and score 250. And then you'll have the weight of history behind you. One last thing: how is the country feeling around this World Cup? Is it being spoken about, or is it just only in cricketing circles? Is there excitement? How is England working around this World Cup, or is it just another women's sport tournament?
I think there's unfortunately not been as much hype as obviously there was when England was hosting it in 2017. Also, of course, the timings of the games being played basically completely overnight in England's time and similar to South Africa. It's going to be difficult to raise excitement. And of course, you've got the men's series in West Indies, which is going to be taking on at the same place. And looking at the shambles which our men's test team is in, it's almost like quite interesting. Like, humans intrinsically are attached to watching suffering. So I feel like a lot of people are looking at the West Indies and going, oh, I can't wait to see England bowled out for 60. There's something weirdly exciting about it. But hopefully, as England progress through this tournament and hopefully get to those final stages, a few more people will get into it and stay up to listen overnight. That's what I'm hoping for, so that someone will actually listen to us as we're in that Manchester studio all night. But there is, I mean, it's difficult with a series in New Zealand, but we can take hope from the fact that when those England women's fixtures were announced for 2022, alongside the 100 games, this series against South Africa and India, there's been a lot of excitement, and people are excited about the test match in Taunton against South Africa. They're excited against the series in India, and of course the Commonwealth Games later on in the year. So there is a lot of excitement around that, and hopefully once people start to wake up to the fact that there's a World Cup coming along very, very soon, that some people will tune in and be able to get behind the England girls.
That's good. Well, Melissa, I'd just like to say, do you have any questions for us around the South African team before we close off?
I do just have a quick one about, just in general, because I haven't really been able to see much of it yet, about Sonia Lou's captaincy. Obviously, you've got the Dane van Niekerk has been an exceptional captain across loads of, not only for South Africa, but in the franchises for Oval Invincibles. How has Sonia Lou's kind of stepped up to that, and how do you think she's done so far? How do you think she's looking to go into this tournament?
Look, she's not as Dane van Niekerk reminds me of the cricket captain who's always busy, always involved, wants to push you. She's not
vocal enough. Like Dane. Dane was very vocal. That's
Dane, I was actually saying Dane is Marizanne Kaur, but not as scary, but similar personality traits. So Dane, like, even in commentary, when you listen to Dane, her frustrations come through if things go wrong. Where Dane's more personable, she's more teammate oriented, she's more wanting to get the best out of you. And not saying Dane doesn't do that, but she's a lot more quiet. She's got a great cricketing brain on her. I think a lot of people will find her quite different to Dane in that she's more laid back, allowing people to be able to do their things. The one issue I have is she's a leg spin bowler. I'm a fan of leg spin bowling. I think she should bowl herself a lot more. If she does that, it solves the whole Dane van Niekerk missing situation, because I think she's a much better bowler than Dane. She just doesn't bowl herself a lot more. Her batting is something that I've had a problem with throughout the past couple of years. I've always thought that she was bubbling in on she could be the next one dropped, largely because I think she hasn't taken that step up in international cricket to put the big numbers down. I don't think she has a century to her name in ODI cricket. So that's something that I'm worried about, or she might have one. So that's one thing I've always been worried about. But from a captaincy perspective, especially in the New Zealand, in this West Indies series, to come from 1-0 down after the first game being rained out and you watching a player en route to 150 and probably even 200 if it didn't rain in Johannesburg that night, to get the team back on track to then win that ODI series from 1-0 down with in a three-game series effectively says a lot about who you are and the way you do it. And it's similar to what you've spoken about. They've tried everything. They chased down a score. They also set a score and strangled everybody. But in the field, she was perfect. I love the way she moved the team around. And I think for me and at this level of cricket, as you say, you can strangle teams. And what they managed to do was to be able to strangle the West Indies in those middle overs. Yes, there were injuries. Every time the West Indies went out to bat, there was an injury. It was just insane.
Because it happens with their men's team as well. You just go out and you pull up with a cramp.
Yes. And if you think about it, you've got DeAndre Dotson, Stefani Taylor, but Hayley Matthews, who are a really good core of that West Indies side, and she handled them like pros. She knew everyone's weaknesses. She knew which bowler bowled better. Even with the chopping and changing of that fourth bowler or that batting lineup, it actually worked. And I'm really happy for her. I think she's now captain 19 games. So the first game of the World Cup would be her 20th. So I think she's the best leader out of this group. And I think, a lot of people would be looking to Laura, but Laura's also very quiet. She just obviously leads with her bat and scores 50 runs every 3 innings because that's what Laura does. So I'm happy with Sinead Lewis. I just want her to bowl herself more, especially if they're not going to play Nonkululeko Mlaba. If you're going to play Mlaba, that's fine. And and I think for me, it's just identifying where to play 20 overs of spin and when not to. Because I do think the default for South African cricket is always 40 overs of seam, 10 overs of spin. I'd like to go 20 overs of spin or even 15 to 20 overs of spin and the rest of the seam. So it's just trying to find that balance. Marizan will be back. Ayabonga's going to be there. Shabnim's there. I'd say, yes, I know it's going to be a detriment to Dumi, but play Nonkululeko Mlaba and then have Chloe and Sune cover those, because I do think there's value in women's cricket to carrying more spinners and playing more overs of spin than there are, even in New Zealand. So that's the one thing I'll be interested to see how she navigates that going through, and also navigates defenses, because I think the one problem with this team is they can score 250, but the next day they'll score 160, and 160 could be in the ambit for all the other teams in and around this World Cup, West Indies, Pakistan and Bangladesh as well. So you could find yourself in like some squeaky bum time. Against West Indies, they got out and they did it well and they managed to win. But I don't think they can get her out of jail as much as possible, more games. But obviously, Lazar's back, Marazan's back. That eases a lot of pressure off of Sine. So I'm really excited to see what she will do, and I hope that she can be holding that trophy at the end, because if she does, she will. Because I think, Melissa, this is the best cricket team in South Africa. I don't care about our men's team. This is the best cricket team in South Africa. This is the one we should be watching, not the shambles that's happening in New Zealand.
I can confirm that, because I watched some of the last tests, and it's some time I've never been able to get back in my life. It was.
Why did you do that? Oh, you like suffering. You just told us.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, I'm saying put South Africa and England in the Test series right now, and the whole world will watch.
Oh, that's well, it's happening in July, and Tim's probably going to be so excited. But yeah, so Melissa, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be touching base with you throughout the tournament. If South Africa meet England in the final or in the semi-final, best believe we're going to be calling you back. We're going to have some lovely banter as we try and navigate this World Cup. But all the best to your team, all the best to your commentary. We'll be looking out for you if it's not geo-blocked. Hopefully it isn't, to be listening to you. If not, have a great day and a great tournament, and I wish you all the best.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me.
Cheers, Melissa. Thanks for coming on.
Tim, thank you very much for organizing it, my friend. We're going to have more of these, and we're going to try and get you all representatives from all 8 teams. We've seen England. There are 7 more to go. 6 more to go because we're one of them. Oh, but we've got one. Yeah, we'll have a South African one as well. So so thank you very much for that.
I was going to say we've got a South African one lined up.
Yes. So
watch the
space.
So
it's exciting, and also watch the space for our commentary schedules for the Women's World Cup, as well as that tour of Bangladesh, the inbound tour of Bangladesh. So thank you very much, Tim. Have a great day. To all our viewers and our listeners, goodbye and lesale kakahiso.